Our individual scripts are informed by bigger cultural scripts. So for men, I have to always be hard. I have to be able to be hard without even being touched. For women, I have to be able to have orgasms from intercourse, or I'm not fully having orgasms. I would really love for people to question what they think they know and believe about sex. Just question it for a second. Where
Yes.
is it coming from? I mean, I can't tell you, like, when I'm doing general couples therapy, people can be so open to being flexible or trying new things. But when it comes to sex, oh, no, 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 no. I can't get off that way. I don't experience pleasure that way. Oh, no, no. I don't like receiving in that way. Like, they're so sure of themselves. Well, the only way I like to have an orgasm is this way. How do you know that? Where did you get that from? Why are you so rigidly invested in a limiting belief?
Welcome to Come Talk with Amy, the podcast where sex isn't whispered about, it's talked about out loud. I'm Amy, your host and intimacy coach, here to spark raw, playful, and unfiltered conversations about relationships, desire, and everything in between. No shame, no scripts, just real talk about what really turns us on. Let's dive in. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Come Talk with Amy. Yes, we have the amazing Ian Kerner in the house today. Welcome, Ian.
Hi, Amy. Nice to be here.
Yes. Oh my God. This is like a pinch me moment. Ian, psychotherapist, also author of She Comes First, definitely a staple book, as well as your recent book, Tell Me the Last Time You Had Sex, which I'm excited to dive in with you about today.
Wherever you want to go, I'm excited.
Yes. All right. So, Ian, before we delve in, tell people at home what you've been up to lately.
What I've been up to lately is what I've been up to almost all the time, which is just seeing individuals and seeing couples every day. I see about 25, 30 individuals or couples a week, some of whom I'm meeting for the first time, some of whom I've been seeing for well over a decade or more, largely focusing on sexual issues that are coming up and trying to create a warm, safe, and intimate space for people to really be vulnerable about an aspect of their identity and their relationship that they're not always so comfortable with. So sometimes couples are talking about sex for the first time in a 10-year relationship sitting in my office. You know, so it's very special work.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. And I always say that it's such a gift to be comfortable talking about sex. So few of us are to just like, I can have a conversation with somebody at Starbucks, grabbing a coffee or, picking up my takeout. But it is such a gift because a lot of people aren't comfortable talking about sex. And a lot of people aren't even talking about the sex that they're having with the people they're having the sex with.
Absolutely. Well, in my experience, people tend to grow up in one of three different kind of home environments: sex negative, sex positive, and sex avoidant. I think very few of us end up growing up in really sex positive homes where sex is modeled and healthy discussions are encouraged and it's considered a natural aspect of human life like anything else. I think many of us grow up in sex negative homes where we are shamed and sex is taboo and there's double standards around sex between people in the home. And I grew up personally in a sex avoidant home. It just wasn't really discussed. I mainly grew up with my mom. My dad saw him on weekends occasionally. I don't think my mom was sex negative nor necessarily sex positive. We just didn't have the conversation. Sex just didn't really exist as a topic. So that seems to be the common experience for many of the individuals and couples I work with. And when you grow up in an environment of avoidance, it's hard to find the words.
Yes, absolutely. And we don't live in a society that helps us either. Not only just at home, but also like in what we see in media, what we see right now with the government, et cetera. But it's so interesting. My background is such an interesting mix. So I grew up in Utah and my parents were divorced when I was 1.5. So I grew up, my mom was the primary caretaker and she left the religion, which is Mormon.
my dad was ultra Mormon. And so I grew up in my mom's home and she became she was very hypersexual. And then we have my dad who was like ultra conservative Mormon and my stepmom. And when I was a teenager, I like switched into kind of like my Mormoness stage. And so I was like, and then there was my mom, like, as a teenager, she like took me to a sex shop, not to get anything because I was not having sex. I was like not even kissing boys at that stage because I was ultra Mormon, but she just loved the shock value. She was talking about sex all the time, but it was still taboo. Like I was learning that you could talk about it, but not in a way that was productive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I mean, that's why it's great. I mean, look, I grew up in a totally different era. There was no internet, there was no social media. There weren't even a lot of magazines or educational materials that offered anything close to an accurate representation of sexuality. So, I kind of grew up in almost like an ice age in a way, although sexiness was everywhere. So I think having these conversations and people getting to be more authentic and vulnerable with sex is hugely important.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because I've lived in a lot of countries, traveled in a lot of countries. I did my master's in London. I've lived in India, South Africa, and a lot of people in other countries have this perception that Americans are so sexual. And it's because of what we see in the media and how it's portrayed. And you would think like we're sex obsessed, and yet we're really not having these conversations. So tell me about the last time you had sex. Yeah, no. No, I'm
Well,
just kidding.
I do, studies have shown that couples who have sex once a week have higher levels of relationship positivity than couples who do not. And couples who have sex 2, 3, 4, 5 times a week don't necessarily have higher levels of relationship positivity than the couples who have sex once a week. But the couples who have sex less than once a week do have lower levels of relationship positivity. I've been married for 25 years. It's funny, in my practice, I work with everything and I love working with everything. My own sex life, pretty monogamous, pretty vanilla. I have a sex script that works. We can, talk about sexual events and sex scripts. So yeah, I do. I believe that sex is something that's important to prioritize. Keeping a level of flirtation and erotic openness in the air is open. So anytime you ask me about the last time I had sex, hopefully I can say, well, this week, because it's a
Yeah.
really important ritual for connection. I'm happier, my wife's happier, we're more connected, our family system is happier.
Yeah, so huge. And you mentioned sex scripts, which I know you
Yeah.
use a lot in your practice. You talk about it in your book. Can we dive into what sex scripts are, how it helps couples or people who are having sex with each other, or even individuals understand their relationship with sex? Yep, let's go.
Yeah, I, as a sex therapist, I deal with a handful of really common problems that show themselves over and over again. In individuals, I'm going to stick with just couples for a second and just treat sex as sort of an interactional event, whether it's casual sex, a one night stand, relational sex, whether you're in a polycule or monogamous, whatever it is. But individuals come in and couples come in and they identify sexual problems. For example, desire discrepancy, libido differences are extremely common. One partner is apparently higher desire than the other partner, and so sexual frequency is really affected. Arousal issues such as erectile unpredictability, orgasm issues, in men, ejaculation issues like early ejaculation or delayed ejaculation. Sometimes I'm dealing with just sexual boredom and a difference in erotic personality. So couples are coming in with these problems, individuals are coming in with these problems, and I tend in a first session to try and do kind of a 360-degree walk around of what's happening and look at it from numerous perspectives. I mean, one of the things that makes sexuality so fascinating is it's determined by biological factors, psychological factors, sociological factors, relational factors. So I try and create sort of a three-dimensional snapshot of what's happening. But ultimately, an individual or a couple wants to leave with some hope that they will be able to better sexually express themselves with a partner or with someone and feel more comfortable in their own sexual skin. So very often in a first session, I like to ask the question, so tell me about the last time you had sex, because I don't want to just talk about sex. I want to hear and learn about sex in action. How did a
Yes.
couple decide to have sex? When and where did it happen? Did it begin with a hot start? Two people walk into a room, they can't keep their hands off of each other. Did it happen with a warm start, some kind of simmering, percolation, cuddling on the couch? Was it a cold start? Hey, let's schedule sex 2 weeks from now because that's the next time we can do it. So how did sex get started? Once sex did get started, how did whoever was in the bed or wherever they were having sex, how did they cultivate arousal? Was it with their bodies? Was it with their minds? What behaviors were on the table? What behaviors were off the table and why? How did they really build that arousal to a peak where each of them could get really into a sexual flow state with each other and then let go and surrender, hopefully, into orgasm? And were those orgasms mutual? Were they asynchronous? Did one or both partners not have them? And then what were the moments after sex like? In the BDSM community, we put such focus on aftercare, and what's happening after a scene or a sexual experience
Yeah.
is just as important as what happened during. And then most importantly, what is happening in the space in between sexual events? What is what I call the erotic thread? How are we keeping our erotic selves alive and in the air? So a
I
sex
love that.
script is literally sort of the sequence of behaviors and interactions that we engage in that underlie a sexual event. And many of us, to self-locate again, as someone who's been married, as someone who's in long-term relationships, as someone who's a New York City therapist, I tend to work with a lot of heterosexual couples, anywhere from young 20s to 60s. I work with a lot of gay men and gay couples. And what I have found is that people do tend to have a go-to sex script. Sex does tend to unfold in somewhat of a predictable way, which has its pros and it has some cons. But what I will say is when a sex script works, it's like dancing. It's like knowing how to tango and being great at it. The dancer and the dance become one. And our sex scripts don't work. That's when we really are lying next to somebody and feeling a million miles apart. So I want to help people sort of edit their current sex script, ultimately reinforcing the problem that they're coming in with, and create new sex scripts that help to work around those problems or eliminate them. So it's ultimately an act of creative writing, so to speak.
Yes. And I love how through your book, the way you write it and you bring in these elements of the creative writing. I'm a writer too. And so I love the way you wrote that.
I'm a big reader, and I've always loved this idea that form follows function. Form can be incredibly diverse, the form of a sexual experience, but it does come back to sort of what's happening, what do we want to accomplish, where do we want to get?
Absolutely. So for sexual partners who feel like their sex scripts are off or they're not working for them, what is a good step forward for making good sex scripts?
Yeah, so again, that's where coming in with the identifying problem and where in the sex script is that problem happening. For many couples, it's right at the beginning. We don't have sex. The last time we had sex was, I don't remember the last time we had sex. We don't agree on the last time we had sex. So in that case, we're going to be looking at a desire discrepancy and how partners may be in different desire frameworks and may experience desire differently and have a hard time creating a shared framework. So that's a very important area to look at. Another very, very common problem that I see in couples of all stripes is that one partner is farther ahead in the arousal process than the other, and another partner is getting left behind. One partner may be just filled with thoughts of what's happening outside of the bedroom while another partner's like in there and going forward. So is it an arousal issue? I have found with so many couples, especially in the United States, sex is largely a sequence of physical behaviors. There isn't a lot of psychological
Ooh.
by what I mean. There isn't an engagement of the erotic mind, which can happen in many different ways, whether we are sharing fantasies, acting them out, communicating in ways that communicate our hunger and our joy, or simply taking in something sexual together. But most couple sex scripts that I work with are sort of bereft of kind of psychological arousal.
Ooh, can we dive into psychological arousal, what that looks like? How can people mix that into their sex lives?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think psychological arousal, we know through research that many women can fantasize their way either to orgasm or close to orgasm without even touching themselves, right? If
Right.
I'm working with a guy and he's experiencing some sort of erectile issue and I want to know if it's organic or if it's psychological, sometimes I'll say, hey, next time you're sitting down to watch some porn, try not touching yourself and let me know if and when you get an erection.
Ooh.
Come back and say, yeah, it took 5-6 minutes, but I had a very sustainable erection. So that's the power of psychological arousal. That's the power of beginning in the erotic mind and converting that arousal into physiological arousal. How do we do that? Or why aren't we doing that? Why are we masturbating and opening up our fantasy lives and erotic imaginations, but not when we're actually having partnered sex? Because of
Yes.
shame, because of a fear of that kind of vulnerability. So, a big part of what I'm a champion of is advocating for more psychological arousal in our sex life. That can come through face to face interactions, sharing fantasies, role playing, engaging in different kinds of sexual play and sexual adventure. But many of the couples I work with, and you have to remember, Amy, I'm working with couples who primarily have issues, right? I'm not working with necessarily people who are
Right.
fully actualized. For many couples or individuals, revealing themselves is that in that face to face way is difficult. So I'll often start with side by side homework assignments like go
Yes.
watch some great ethical porn together. Go read some great literary erotica together. Go listen to an incredible erotic audio. Allow the stimuli to come in. One last little anecdote is even being able to be really present and embodied during sex and to be able to think of sex as a meal that we can savor together. I was working with one couple and they had such quiet sex. They never talked to each other and they wanted more psychological arousal and they couldn't get there. And then I happened to be at the same restaurant that they were at, which was like a fancy tasting menu restaurant. They didn't see me there, but the way they were eating together, right? The way they were savoring every dish, talking about how succulent and soft the food was and lifting a fork and saying, open up, open wide, try this. Oh, just it's going to melt on your tongue. I was like, they're having public sex in a way that they would never have in their own bedrooms. So I brought that to them the next time I saw them. They decided a step into the world of psychological arousal was just like enjoying the meal of sex and letting each other know how enjoyable it was.
Yes, I love your concepts of face to face and side by side. And I think in the book, you mention often starting with that side by side is a good entryway versus the face to face.
Absolutely. I think it's really important to introduce our erotic imaginations to each other. And I think with sexuality and fantasy, I mean, yesterday this came up twice because when someone is introducing fantasy to someone else, we sort of get this think of a swimming pool, like the deep end version of what this partner wants, you know? But in every situation, every fantasy, there's also a shallow end, and there's a way of just starting to dip your toes to the waters of psychological arousal, warming up and moving forward. But psychological arousal is key. Research also shows that women tend to fantasize a lot more during sex than men do. And why? As the research shows, it's because fantasy is very helpful in enabling a woman to turn off her thinking brain during sex, which is harder for a woman
Absolutely.
than it is for a male. So fantasy provides a very valuable function. It allows us to escape the stressors and anxieties of our real world lives and enter into the trance and flow of sex.
And now for people at home that maybe, are listening to this without their partner and are interested in navigating this or starting to talk about sex scripts, starting to do some of this work. But again, you mentioned shame, right? Like I talk about shame almost every episode here because it's so ingrained in our
Mhm.
sex lives. What's a good way for people to start this conversation, right? To even get to the point of implementing this or bringing it up to their partner?
It's not easy to talk about sex, and that's why so many people end up going to see a sex therapist simply to be able to talk about it. But I would say for somebody who's interested in having the conversation on their own and using this concept of sort of sex scripts, think about a sexual event that you're having and think about what's not working for you. For a lot of women living in the United States in, let's say, heteronormative relationships, intercourse is usually the defining event of sex.
Yeah.
And that can be very problematic, right? Because intercourse really doesn't provide enough direct clitoral stimulation. And so a lot of women would like more clitoral stimulation sequentially timed appropriately as part of a sexual event. Okay, so you want more outer course, and your typical sexual events do not have much outer course. Great. Okay, you've defined the problem, not enough outer course. You've defined the solution, more outer course. What is it that you would like? My partner loves for me to go down on him, but he doesn't go down on me, or we don't go down on each other. Whatever it is. Okay, you'd like more oral sex. Now, how do you bring that to a partner? I think the beauty of sexual language is that it actually evokes sexual arousal. So I would ask a client to put their desire in the form of a fantasy of some sort that includes what they'd like as part of a new sex script. Okay, now how do you tell your partner that this is your fantasy without feeling embarrassed or that you're going to criticize them or something? So that's when I'll sometimes say, just, when you wake up, if you happen to be waking up next to somebody that you have sex with, tell them that you had a really sexy dream about them last night. If they don't ask, that's a whole nother problem. If someone's not
Mhm.
interested in your sexual dream, that's saying something too. But assuming they are, create a little sexual white lie and tell them your fantasy in the form of a dream and
I
blame
love
it on
that.
your unconscious. I don't know what my unconscious was up to, but it was hot. Here's what was happening. I guess in short, try and take a sexual problem, really think about the sexual solution, and then try and express it in a sexy way. I think most of us just get hung up on, here's the problem, here's what I'm not getting, here's why I resent it. We're not
Yeah.
taking the next step to really think beyond our resentment or beyond what we're not getting.
Absolutely. Resentment. As you were talking to, I was just thinking about how all of us know, like, I'm not a mind reader. And yet, I think when it comes to sex and relationships, we all assume that the other person is can read our minds, right? And
Absolutely.
then that leads to resentment. I see that a lot with the people that I work with on a coaching and also just in my friend group as well. Can you speak a little bit to resentment and how to break that down? Or how to try and avoid getting to that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you just said is accurate. Like if we're not communicating about sex or really any topic that's important to us relationally that involves somebody else, we are forming a mental model of the other person that is not necessarily accurate. For example, a guy is experiencing erectile issues, or a guy experiences early ejaculation, but the couple doesn't ever talk about it. And so the partner who's on the receiving end of that early ejaculation is thinking to themselves, oh, he's selfish, or he's sexually just inexperienced, or he's a sexual narcissist. He doesn't care about my pleasure. Meanwhile, that other person over there might care about, that might be the main thing that they care about, but they just are too shy or don't know how to approach the topic, right? So I've found, especially with sex, our mental models of what we think is happening with the other person is almost always inaccurate and wrong. We want to update our mental models of our sexual selves and our projections of each other. And what can I say? That just takes communication. I mean, this is where we just get into how do we communicate well with people and get through life and get what we need and give each other what we need.
I know, literally, like, I always like to quote Emily Morris on this: communication is lubrication, like
Uh-huh.
communication. It's so hot, and it can be done in such a fun foreplay-ish way, right? Like foreplay all day, whether it's
Mhm.
through sexting or like, ooh, talking about the last time the couple had sex with each other, and out of the bedroom, ideally talking about like, ooh, I really liked when you did this. Can we have more of that? Or
Mhm.
and even, bringing up the things that you didn't like, but framing it in a positive way that, can be receptive, and it can be super hot. It doesn't have to be mechanical or awkward.
And, also remembering that sex isn't just about the behaviors we're engaging in. It's really about the emotions that surround these behaviors. So the main issue might be that I feel neglected or rejected. We're not having as much sex, and but it's really hitting me in a very emotional way. I'm really feeling lonely. I'm really feeling rejected. I'm feeling disrespected. So much of the resentment we experience is around the deep emotions that and the wounds that aren't getting addressed.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm wondering, like, because a lot of it is kind of self reflection, right? And as far as sex and trusting ourselves, like, how do we get to the point of unpacking that for ourselves individually so that we can show up in the bedroom for our partners and for ourselves the way that we want to?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think, this is where it would be great to start reading a book by Emily Nagoski, or a book by Emily Morris, or a book
Yep.
by Esther Perel, or a book by Stephanie Gorlick on kink. I mean, this is where we have to invest in our own self-knowledge and our own self-education.
Absolutely. And I love too that earlier you brought up BDSM. I'm kinky myself here, and I talk about it a lot. I feel like whether you're kinky or not, there's so much to learn from the BDSM community in, again, that psychological arousal, the communication, right? And then even and like especially the aftercare piece as well.
I think, kink and BDSM, we kind of put it over here, put it away from us, but really it exists in all of us, the capacity for our own sexual individuality to be expressed. And, with BDSM, you're right that there are so many best practices in terms of understanding that this is about play, role play, power play, and that sense of play, and even a play in the theatrical sense of a play, and working out a scene together and having fun constructing a scene. And then, of course, levels of consent that are explicit and implicit, and aftercare. The thing that I have learned the most from working with patients who are quite involved in BDSM is that kink is also an orientation. Can be a sexual orientation. There's so much more to how we are sexually oriented than just the kinds of genitals we want to rub up against, and whether
Mhm.
you're heterosexual or gay or bisexual. So much interesting research is getting into what's called multidimensional sexual orientations. So
Ooh,
someone could really be oriented around submission or around being
mhm.
in a way that's just as powerful as being gay or straight. And so I think we should think of our orientations in multidimensional terms. And that's something that I really get from the kink community.
Damn, I love that. You're dropping like all of these amazing gems. Going back to, because you mentioned like desire discrepancies, right? When people who are having sex with each other identify that they do have different desire discrepancies, what is some ways to understand it, to match, and to work with each other?
I think with desire discrepancy, it's really easy to get into this feeling of, oh, I'm a high desire partner and my partner is a low desire partner. Something's wrong with my partner. And it goes vice versa. I have a normal desire. My partner is always just thinking about sex, sex, sex. Like it's easy to pathologize our partner's appetites and desire for sex. I don't want to think about it in terms of high or low. I tend to find that people are in different desire frameworks at different phases in their life. If you go to, say, the work of Emily Nagoski, she's done a good job of articulating the research around two different desire frameworks, one being a spontaneous desire framework. Remember, at the beginning, I talked about that hot start. We get in a room and we just feel it, want it, it's there, it's palpable, and we're consuming each other. That would be spontaneous desire. The other desire framework that gets talked about a lot is a responsive desire framework, which is more of that warm start, right? We have to cultivate, we have to simmer some arousal. We have to put ourselves through that process a little bit. We have to have a willingness to get to desire. It's not just spontaneous. It's not the first thing that happens. So I find that for many couples who find that they're in desire discrepant relationships or they're just not interested at the same time, it's because these two frameworks are clashing and they have to create a shared framework.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I have like this, for example, is where I have a homework assignment that I call a willingness window, where a couple is finding a window of time in which to be sexual with each other, and they are bringing their willingness, not their desire. Now, some people would say, oh, you mean scheduling sex? Well, that sucks. I don't want to schedule sex. Sex shouldn't be scheduled. And that's where we come across, I talked about individual sex scripts, but there's also cultural sex,
Yes.
societal sex scripts around sex should always be spontaneous and chemical. Well, great. So you're not having sex and you're not willing to prioritize or schedule it, if that's the word you want to use. So what do you want to do? Why are we even talking to you?
Right.
You just want to complain about it? So I do try and give homework assignments based on psychoeducation around, say, these different frameworks that helps people find each other. And I think this is where psychoeducation is just so important, giving people the frameworks to understand what's going on. Because if I'm in a spontaneous desire framework, my partner's in a responsive desire framework, I may be thinking like, geez, what happened? Like, we used to have sex all the time, or why am I always the one that has to initiate and get rejected? Why does my partner just not care about sex, right? And if you're a responsive desire partner, you actually may be thinking, just based on the scripts that society puts out there, yeah, what is wrong with me? Why am I not experiencing this spontaneously? I used to, something must be wrong with me. I must be broken in some way. And that's where we have a pharmaceutical industry that's really trying to target especially women and to
Right.
pathologize a natural aspect of female sexuality. Or that responsive desire person may be thinking, gosh, sex, 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 that's all this person thinks about. Whatever happened to just like hanging out or being nice? But once you explain these different framework and how they are sort of biologically based in some ways, or in many ways, it's a big form of relief.
Personally, a huge fan of scheduled sex. I feel like, again, it's foreplay for me. I also am a single mom. And so, like, if I'm having sex, it usually is scheduled because
Yeah.
I need to set it up. Like, I have things to do. And if people aren't willing to do that, like, it's not just going to happen, right? Because I don't have a partner in my house. And I think it's hot to, like, build in the anticipation to know, like, ooh, we're going to get together. And etc. And I'm also a Taurus, so I'm like, schedule it 2 weeks in advance. Fabulous. But I feel like a misconception in society that like sex should just be spontaneous. And if it's not, then we're doing something wrong. And I'm like, it's hot when it's spontaneous, but I feel personally that it's so much hotter when it's scheduled or not scheduled. Like, I guess I love your concept of willingness framework, right? And finding a time to play. I like to talk about sex as play. Like, I think that's another really key aspect from that we can all borrow from BDSM is like seeing it as play.
And, guess what? Most people who are in relationships started out dating each other. And guess what? A date that leads to sex is scheduled sex. We are going to go on a date in 10 days from now. I am planning a really nice dinner, and then I want this person to come back to my place. Guess what? You are scheduling sex. Your
Yeah.
date is scheduled sex, potentially.
Yes. And if you think about going back to like the excitement in the early stage, right? A lot of those times it was that you were making plans, right? That brought the excitement around that.
And you know what we were doing? And this is where I have another assignment. We were clearing the decks for sex. We were thinking,
Yes.
"Oh, during that day, I'm going to look good. I'm going to feel good. I'm not going to get on the phone with my mother and argue. I'm going to pick somewhere fun to go. I'm going to be really nice and really curious. And then I'm going to make sure my apartment is clean and my sheets are changed." We're creating a whole runway for sex to happen. And we're prioritizing getting there in ways that we don't do once we're in a relationship. So I will tell someone who's a couple who's going to schedule sex, or a person who's planning a date who's going to schedule sex, wake up and organize your day so that you can get there at the end of the day. Just as
Yeah.
you would do on a second date with someone you're really into.
Yes. I love it. Prioritize sex for sure. So, Ian, I cannot have you on the pod and not talk a little bit about She Comes First.
Sure.
I mean, groundbreaking work, 2004, talking about oral sex for women, like so huge. Thank you for giving that gift to us.
Thank you. I'm glad the book is still out there and resonating. It came from a place of passion. It began way before I was a sex therapist, the origins of that book with my own sexuality and just struggling with sexual dysfunction and putting so much pressure on my own performance and my own genital function in a way that really inhibited and complicated that function. And then realizing that even if I had the ideal function that I wanted as a heterosexual male, it didn't mean that my partner was going to actually enjoy the sex because I was totally ill-cliterate at the time. I had no understanding of how female sexuality operated. I was living under the shadow of what I call the intercourse discourse. And what I really wanted to do was to liberate sex from the penis, introduce a outer course-based clitorate model of sexuality, and allow folks to just relax into sex and enjoy it in a different way. So it was really about relieving pressure and dismantling cultural scripts around what sex is supposed to look like. And, and that's really been the through line for my work. Without using the word sex script, back in 2004, I was trying to dismantle the common sex scripts that I felt were oppressing and subjugating all of us, many of us sexually. And today, I'm still talking about sex scripts that create erotic freedom, facilitate erotic expression, and most importantly, just facilitate absorption into arousal.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, so huge, still so relevant for today. I mean, the orgasm gap is alive and thriving, but, thank you to your work. Some of the colleagues also that you mentioned, it's getting less and less, hopefully, right? Shorter. The gap is is decreasing, but there's still so much work to be done, and so huge.
I definitely, when I wrote She Comes First, it was men were threatened by vibrators. It was not common to bring a vibrator into partnered sex. It was not common to think of a sexual event as being structured around outer course as opposed to intercourse. Models of thinking about female sexuality were not clitorally focused. So it's still feet on the ground work, boots on the ground work today, but hopefully more and more people are getting the message.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And for me too, like I want for people to be more comfortable being receivers and givers, right? Like it can be really hard to receive for both men and women, right? So yeah, that's something that I think, speaks to your work as well as being
Yeah,
comfortable.
receiving is the hardest part. What it really ties into is that one thing that I find in my practice, which has always been prevalent, but it rears its head in different ways, is performance anxiety that leads to some kind of genital malfunction, let's just say. Basically, anxiety puts us in non-sexual, non-erotic states. For me, the definition of great sex is to become mutually self-absorbed and to merge into a kind of flow state together where our thinking brains can turn off. And anxiety keeps our thinking brains on, which means we are not getting into those flow states.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and as you were talking, it brought me to this excerpt in your book, and I really wish I would have pulled it because I think it's where you're talking about touch, if I'm not mistaken. But all of a sudden, I was like, wait a minute. I live in New York as well, and I was on the subway, and all of a sudden, I was like, am I reading erotica now? Like, what's going on? So hot. So definitely for all of the reasons that we've been talking about today, get the book. But there's this passage in here where you're describing this couple and exactly this being enthralled within each other. And if you can get to that point in sex, like that's the magical part.
Right. And you were mentioning how receiving is so difficult. If we're receiving, we almost expect to be performing then in some ways. What is
Yep.
the person who's giving us pleasure expecting of me right now? And that's why giving can be so much easier than receiving pleasure, and why we want to create sexual environments that are non-demand and non-pressured. Where we're not expecting anything from each other. We just want to go on a mutual journey into arousal and pleasure.
Yes, absolutely. So, as we wrap up, just a few more questions. What would you want, or whether this is with your clients, for people listening in, what is the biggest thing that you want them to stop judging themselves about when it comes to sex?
I would love for people to stop judging themselves in terms of frequency. Again, our individual scripts are informed by bigger cultural scripts. So for men, I have to always be hard. I have to be able to be hard without even being touched. For women, I have to be able to have orgasms from intercourse, or I'm not fully having orgasms. I would really love for people to question what they think they know and believe about sex. Just question it for a second. Where
Yes.
is it coming from? I can't tell you, like, when I'm doing general couples therapy, people can be so open to being flexible or trying new things. But when it comes to sex, oh, no, 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 no. I can't get off that way. I don't experience pleasure that way. Oh, no, no. I don't like receiving in that way. Like, they're so sure of themselves. Well, the only
Mm-hmm.
way I like to have an orgasm is this way. How do you know that? Where did you get that from? Why are you so rigidly invested in a limiting belief?
Yes. There is so much expansion to be had. Again, like going to break down those sexual shame barriers, so expansive. This has been fucking fabulous. Thank you for bringing your knowledge and your wisdom to us today. Your decades of work, just so fabulous. One last question before we move to coming to completion. I'm curious, like, how do you see, because you've been doing this work for quite a while, where do you see this idea of pleasure and continuing to evolve throughout society?
Sometimes I like to talk to individuals or couples who are interested in exploring erotic possibility is saying you're standing in front of three doors. But behind door number one is the sex that you and a person or you and your partner, just the two of you, can have in the metaphoric bedroom. What's possible between the two of you? And that's how so many couples are trying to live their lives monogamously oriented. Behind door number two is non-monogamy, something that couples are really starting to embrace, even ones who started monogamously oriented, and hopefully they're picking for the right reason. And that means sort of having a primary story, but maybe having a secondary sexual story or two. Door number three is shared sexual adventurousness. What can we do together out in the world, or what can we bring from the world back into our bedroom? But it's generally more than just the two of us. And so I guess I see things going in two directions. I'd like to see one, I'd like to see couples embrace the virtues of predictability and knowing a partner and knowing what works and being able to dance a dance without feeling like I have to learn some fancy new step today. Just being able
Mhm.
to dance with the rhythms and routines that are unconsciously encoded within us. And then I'd love couples or individuals to also think about like that door number three and like, how can we adventure out in the world together and have a different version of monogamy that's not quite the non-monogamy that we always think about, but like kind of a monogamy that's being shared in the world with others.
So beautiful. Oh, thank you so much, Ian, for giving us all of these keys to the kingdom to unlock all of the doors.
Thank you.
Before we wrap up, we always love
Uh-huh.
to come to completion here at Come Talk with Amy.
Okay.
And that's AKA our rapid fire round. Are you ready to come to completion?
Sure. Let's do it.
All right. Okay. So I'm going to ask questions and then you'll answer them. So sex becomes better when people stop doing this.
Stop thinking about the sex that they're having and just be present in the sex that they're having.
Yes. Okay. Desire disappears fastest when?
When we're not creating space for desire to emerge, when we're just expecting it to emerge, we have to create the garden in which desire can grow and plant the seeds.
So I love that. Okay. The most underrated erotic skill.
Is engaging our erotic minds and just being able to have play with each other sexually and have sexual conversations.
Yes. Okay. Performance kills intimacy when?
When it creates an anxiety that leads to a kind of panic where we cannot get into our bodies and our bodies are not available to us as allies.
Oh, God. Our bodies being available to us as allies. That's so beautiful. Oh, okay. Presence feels like blank in the body.
It feels like relaxation, being in flow, and a flow that's coming through connection.
Yes. Mic drop. Mic drop right there. This has been so amazing, Ian. And I have to say, I always have some fun mugs here, but I definitely chose this one today for
Oh,
you.
that's great. Thanks for all the orgasms.
Thanks for all the orgasms, for giving us since 2004 and beyond all of this fabulous work that you've been doing. I'm so excited for people at home. Definitely go and read Ian's book. So tell me about the last time you had sex. So fabulous, and delve so much deeper into what we've been talking about today. And I love that you have, Ian, every chapter, I believe, has like homework assignments, or
Yeah.
not that I like to say homework, let's say play assignments.
Yeah, little experiments, play assignments, but I definitely like to take a practical approach as well to my work. Not just a psychological approach, but also a practical approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've definitely done it here in this book. So, Ian, where can people find you?
Just on my website, Amy, I'm an older dude. I have not embraced social media. I still have to use my kid's account to go onto Instagram. So it's just going to be my website.
We love that. We'll definitely have your website linked in the show notes. And for people at home, please, Ian and I want to hear, like, what did you learn today? What are your takeaways? How are you going to play in the bedroom? As always, remember to masturbate, lubricate, and get ate. And thank you for coming. Please come again, and come again.
That's all for today, lover. Remember to masturbate, lubricate, and get ate. If you liked this episode, share with a friend, like, subscribe, and as always, thank you for coming. Please come again, and come again.